Hello and welcome to the test screening. I'm Billy.
I'm Chloe. We're two film school graduates and cinephiles who can't seem to get enough of the big screen.
So now we're bringing you our weekly insights into the biggest releases, hottest topics and forgotten classics every Monday.
Hello and welcome back to the test screening. My name is Chloe.
And my name is Billy.
We're going to start off today by talking about one of Billy's favourite TV shows. And I'm aware that I'm going to have to keep you to time here because I feel like you could do a whole episode talking about Succession, but it's just been announced about the new season. So take it away, Billy. Tell us what we need to know.
Oh, well, I've been hotly anticipating the fourth season of Succession ever since the bombshell ending of season 3, which I won't spoil for anyone who may not be up to date yet, because I know you aren't. I've been begging you to get on the Succession hype train, but
I will, I promise. I'm a busy woman.
I know, I'm a busy man too. But yeah, the fourth season is out in the UK on Sky Atlantic, I believe, on Monday, the 27th of March, a day after it premieres in the US on HBO Max. And for anyone who doesn't know, it revolves around the power dynamics and power struggles within a media conglomerate family. At the start of the series, on the day that Logan Roy, the sort of the patriarch of the family, is due to sort of step down and give over power of the company to his son Kendall, he decides at the last minute he isn't going to do that, and then has a stroke, which then essentially sends the whole family into disarray as his two siblings, Siobhan and Roman, then essentially fight it out, slug match for control of the company. And it's one of the most sharply written, kind of blazingly savage and hilarious, but also, deeply like Shakespearean, tragic, familial issues, shows on television. It's just got this fabulous mix of kind of docudrama with this really kind of free form, in the moment, handheld camera work, and also just these scathingly hilarious insults. And yeah, I'm really excited for it to come back. And just I admire the showrunners and the writers' decision a lot to. I thought it was going to run until season 5, but the writers have decided to jack it in at the end of the fourth season. And the cast have all expressed, sort of deep grief and loss and sadness at this, such an incredible experience being on the show is having to come to an end. But Brian Cox was noted as saying in an interview that he respected the showrunners, particularly given that I think with a lot of American TV shows, it's been sort of notable instances in the past of shows running for far too long. And he said, I think it's very British of them because a lot of our British series are quite compact and short, and he praised the writer's decision to finish it early. And it just got me thinking about that idea of milking a TV series and dragging it on for too long versus brevity, because I think in recent years there's been some real great examples of shows that aired on the side of brevity and greatly stuck the landing because of that. I mean, the most two notable examples for me are The Good Place and Mr. Robot. Mr. Robot having an incredible final season, and they just had some of the best episodes of TV I think I've ever watched, and this genius plot twist at the very, very end. And The Good Place just kind of building up to this thing that it had built up to across most of the season, and then sort of dealing with the aftermath of that and sort of subverting the viewer's expectations in a really beautifully moving way in the final few episodes. And I know you watched The Good Place, didn't you?
I did. I love The Good Place. I'm a bit obsessed with The Good Place. I mean, there's been so many mini-series recently as well. Netflix has been especially good at rolling out some of these compact series, like The Queen's Gambit. I was obsessed with that. I thought that was fantastic. But, it's quite funny that you say that, because one of your other favourite shows is arguably one of the ones that people have the most problem with outstaying its welcome. And that's Lost. So where do you stand on that? Do you think that Lost outstayed its welcome?
Well, I think, trying to be fair, I think if you'd asked me at 10 or 11 or 12 when I like first watched Lost, holds a special place in my heart due to being my first kind of like more adult drama I watched around that time. And I think at the time I would have gone, no, it's perfect. It's like tight as can be. And there's like, and anyone who says otherwise just wasn't paying attention. I think now because I haven't watched it in full all the way through since then, I've sort of like rewatched episodes and bits and pieces then. I think the third season has like several, because obviously the story structure of Lost is very flashback heavy, and I think around the third season, like there's an episode revolving around Jack's tattoos and how he got them, and it's just like, does that really add that much to his character? There's a couple episodes that expand some of the other like non-core cast members, like some of the survivors on the beach, and I'm just like, why? Because do they add anything to the overall narrative? No. And yeah, I think season 3 was kind of the point at which I think Damon Lindelof and the Lost writing team have said, yeah, we kind of made it up as we went along. And I think maybe if I watched with a keener eye now, around the third season, I think I would probably start to see some of the cracks and some of the seams where they would maybe trying to stretch it out a bit. But I still can't. I can't rip too much on Lost. Well, I know one of your favorite shows is also a bit guilty of that.
Maybe. Okay, I'm a massive Buffy the Vampire Slayer fan, as in I will preach about it to everyone I meet. It's that kind of obsession, and I apologize, but also I don't apologize. I will force it on you. It's aged. Like, I mean, I don't think it's any surprise to anyone that Buffy the Vampire Slayer is aged not the best. It was groundbreaking at the time, but we've moved on. It's that kind of thing. Buffy had exactly one too many seasons, but I love the ending. But season 7 was shocking. It's only rewatching it with other people that I've realised how bad the last season is until you get to the end. It's honestly heartbreaking.
Hurts you every time you rewatch it.
It does. I kind of miss the days of 22 episode seasons. And I know that means that you usually get a lot of filler in a show and things that like your tattoo episode in Lost and things like that. At the same time, there's something so charming about those like bottle episodes and those character exploration episodes that contribute nothing to the plot, but they're just kind of fun rides. And I don't know, I feel like they don't make them anymore, and I think there's partly one of the good reasons for that will be labour laws. The industry's changed. To make a 22 episode season is actually insane when you think that some of these episodes were like an hour long. So I think it's, you can have a bigger budget if you have a smaller season, which makes a lot of sense. But I kind of miss it. I kind of miss having something really long form that I can be invested in for a long period of time. What do you think?
Yeah, part of me does miss it too. I mean, because Lost was my first kind of big adult drama, and most of its seasons are 18 episodes plus, sort of 18 to 25 episodes per season, apart from 4, which is 14 during the writer's strike. But I really felt like you had a massive sort of build up across like the seasonal arc, and then I mean, Lost was famous for how incredibly, I still don't think I've ever seen a TV show that quite did a season finale like Lost. They were just incredible. And there was so much build up, so much gradual tension. The arcs were allowed to breathe so much, and so much sort of unpacking of the characters' previous lives before they got stranded on the island, that when you did finally get to their sort of big, showdown or character building moments in the final episodes, some of them are just heartbreaking or just inspirational. There's so many moments in Lost. I'm just so keen for you to get to, just so I can talk to you about them and how I felt the first time watching them. When I gasped the room down or like just floods of tears.
We'll do a swap at some point. We'll do like when our lives are less crazy. I'll binge Lost, and you can binge Buffy.
Yes, because it's been on the list for ages.
And we
On
can exchange our
y-
opinions. Because I do need
yeah,
to watch it. Lost has been on my list for a while, and we did watch the first episode together, and I did really like it. So I feel like I will get into it. It's just one of those ones where I'm like, am I ready for another obsession of that size? Because that's
oh
what's
yeah,
put me off everything so far. That's the benefit of a
120.
short season. You know, if a short series, you know you're going to be satisfied. You know you're going to get a conclusion, and you know that like everything's going to wrap up nice and neat. And there is something satisfying about that, knowing that you're going into something which is whole. But then there's also, I mean, it's a dedication, but there's also, to me, quite a bit of excitement going into something unwielding and unending, where you don't really know where it's going to take you.
Yeah, especially with like the amount of questions that something like Lost throws up. That will just keeps you going to like, oh, one more. Oh wait, we've watched 9. That sort of thing. Also,
That's like
just on
Game
the
of
topic of,
Thrones.
yeah, absolutely. I remember just like binging like 2 seasons of Game of Thrones in like a week with my parents. It was mad at the time, just obsessed.
Hmm.
But like again on just like the long form arc thing. I remember watching Friday Night Lights, which I think its first season I think is 22 eps, and because they're building up to State, the season finale is State, the big, I think if I remember rightly it's set in Texas, the big statewide football competition. You know that you've got that competition in sight throughout the whole season. So then, and you go through the various stages of the competition throughout season 1, and then when you finally get there, there's so much going into it, and you've been with the team every step of the way, and you know their struggles and how hard they've trained. Then when you finally go into that match, it's just nail biting tension because you just want them to succeed so much. And that show and that season, I think, particularly benefit from that sort of extra screen time.
Definitely. Well, I know that we could talk about this all day, but we have to get up. We have to get onto some reviews now. So the first one this week, I thought this came out ages ago, and it did, right? When was this released?
So when Crawdad Sing, it came out all the way back in last year, and
Based
I
on a
want to say
book, is that right? I seem to remember it being based on quite a popular book.
yes, it's based off a very popular novel sold in excess of 10 million copies worldwide, just in a complete literary juggernaut.
My God.
Yeah, coming of age murder mystery novel by an American zoologist named Delia Owens, who was actually really, really strangely and kind of art imitating life, was actually indicted on a murder charge. I'm not sure exactly what came of that case, but yeah, it's just kind of fascinating. That sort of, it's almost more fascinating than the actual film. I haven't read the novel, but yeah, I'm just reading now. By July 2022, it had sold over 15 million copies. So naturally, given that it was such a zeitgeisty novel and such a runaway success, that it was going to be optioned for a film adaptation. And Reese Witherspoon's production company actually picked it up. And big fan of Reese Witherspoon and her, her choice to try and champion female-centric stories and adapt interesting work for the big screen. So where the Crawdads Sing, it centers around a young girl named Kaya, who grew up in the marshes of North Carolina, kind of the rural sort of swamp areas, living a very sort of secluded existence where she knows how to drive a boat from a very young age. She's kind of not completely lives off the land because there are nearby shops, but it's a very removed and incredibly different way of life from the rest of the surrounding area in which she lives. And naturally, because she's very different and has had a very different upbringing, she's kind of known as Marsh Girl within the local community. There's a lot of prejudice against her, and people make up stories about her being kind of feral and a wild child, and being base and not adhering to normal social conventions, where actually she's an incredibly intelligent, compassionate, empathetic, resourceful young woman. And one night when the police are sort of patrolling around the marshes, they find a young male who has seemingly fallen from sort of a telephone wire tower, but appears as though there may have been a foul play, and naturally, because of the preconceived notions about her, she is then brought in for questioning and then subsequently charged with the murder. And we see the court case alongside flashbacks as to what exactly led her to that point, that sort of, again, challenge and unpack that expectation and judgment that the community has made of her, juxtaposed with how she actually is. Incredibly interesting, relevant subject matter that also kind of has the potential to, in a really interesting and thought-provoking way, intertwine coming of age and, you know, courtroom drama, murder mystery, almost maybe a hint of romance novel as well. And to start with the good, Daisy Edgar-Jones plays Kaya of Normal People fame, who I'm a tremendous fan of, and she's in reliably solid form. She's able to convey the more childlike and somewhat stunted development that Kaya has seen since she's been operating on the fringes of society and come from a somewhat abusive household. But she's also able to imbue the character with a lot of strength, a lot of self-reserve, a lot of environmentally wildlife-driven intelligence and wit and resourcefulness. She brings layers of emotional and sensitivity and vulnerability, but also like this precocious worldview and quietly burgeoning creativity. She sort of finds she has an aptitude for drawing wildlife, and she's the heart of the proceedings. And she, at the very least, she kept me wanting to see how things would play out for the character. David Strathairn is also he's earnest and upstanding. He kind of gives me, you know, slight Atticus Finch vibes. He's doing a good job of being the surrogate for our more open-minded audience perspective on Kaya as a character, without feeling too overtly cliche-ridden, though it can sometimes feel as though his character only really exists in the film to serve that thematic purpose, and the script doesn't really do a lot to build him out as a distinct character beyond kind of being the person who instigates those flashbacks and that desire for the wider community to see her in a less judgmental way. I also appreciate how, while the film does tout a murder mystery as part of its central narrative and conceit, it avoids falling into the mundane trappings of a by-the-book courtroom drama that could be quite stifling and stale and very stilted and uninteresting. It dedicates a lot more screen time to unpacking Kaya's life in the marshes in flashbacks and her relationships with the people around her. I do feel this was a far more compelling plotline to go down, as the mystery doesn't have a shred of the complexity that would be needed for it to be actually mysterious, and it does kind of end up being a double-edged sword, though, because it makes the actual innocence or guilt of Kai, you know, whether or not she has in fact committed this crime, as well as the courtroom proceedings, it kind of makes that wholly uninteresting every time we sort of go back to the courtroom, because it doesn't feature all that much. We kind of go, oh no, I want to be back there in the marsh with her. And the final plot revealed twist at the very end, it for me significantly undermined the open-minded message that had come before, which I thought was a real shame. And I do think the film also suffers from an overall larger issue that it kneecaps its overall potential and means it never really rises above being more than, say, mildly compelling. And that is, you know, when you describe the subject matter and mention murder mystery in the very unique kind of southern marshland setting, it implies a degree of grit and darkness in the story that feels sure to, you know, grip you as a viewer and pull you along for the ride. It's disappointing then that the overall feeling of Crawdads is not one of foreboding tension, but of like bland inertia and just very well-mannered, well-behaved. Whilst I wouldn't go as far to say it's sugar-coated, that seems a bit strong, the overall tone is picturesque. And it could have used that to advantage, you know, by leaning into the potential poetry in the story, but it doesn't really do that. It doesn't really, you know, have that much of a strong personality. It doesn't venture too much in any given direction or have that much of a strong vision behind it. It's polished, Steadicam views and loving vistas feel a bit sanitized. They clear any raw grit out of the film's bloodstream. It feels remarkably safe considering it's delving into quite knotty moral and ethical issues in a backward setting that could evoke, great murk and like kind of wickedly compelling gloom and darkness. Even during moments where it feels like the film may venture into moments, true, disturbing material, it curtails that approach to viciousness at like the last moment. It pulls back, it never fully commits to it, and it seems totally reluctant to venture into any territory that would be considered the slightest bit subversive. And as a result, the character interaction, whilst not bad and decently played and acted, as well as the overall direction, it all feels very measured and neutered, I would say, to the point of the film being occasionally boring. That smoothness in direction does keep the pace steadily moving throughout the film, but despite that, the material, it feels strained, and that although it's as though it's trying its best to fill out the overlong 2-hour runtime without completely succeeding in that, despite the actors' best efforts. The fact that Columbia Pictures was involved, it does kind of signal to me that maybe they had a hand in maybe trying to make the story a bit more palatable, cleaner, more widely appealing to a mass audience. And if that is the case, then I do think it has happened at the expense of the material. But I didn't hate it overall. I thought it was mildly interesting and decent, but not particularly, somewhat lightweight, not particularly, heavy or memorable. I would give it a B-. I wouldn't say avoid it, but it's not particularly interesting.
So maybe not. Are you going to race out and buy the book?
Oh, I've heard really good things about the book from several colleagues, so I could still potentially check out the book. I mean, every account I've heard is that the book is significantly better. So I would still be interested in checking out the novel, but the film's currently on Sky. I wouldn't say race to watch this one, although it wouldn't exactly be a waste of time either.
Our next one is a documentary, and this won Best Documentary at the Oscars. It's Navalny. So this is about the Russian opposition to Putin, so a very timely documentary. What were your thoughts?
So this was the only one of the Best Documentary nominees I hadn't seen prior to watching the Oscars, and its win was expected, and I didn't really have a lot of feelings on that, considering I hadn't watched it beforehand. And I was really pulling for Fire of Love, because we reviewed it before on the show. I think that documentary is wonderful. But after having seen Navalny, I think it's probably the strongest documentary of the bunch. I was quite surprised. It doesn't necessarily strike you as the most emotive subject matter or poetic in the same way that Fire of Love is, but it's just gripping and thrilling, and the stuff that happens in it is like straight out of a spy thriller. It's insane. You can't quite believe it actually happened, and it follows Alexei Navalny's very kind of valiant efforts to run against Vladimir Putin and potentially instill confidence in his voters and strengthen his following, and then runs up to his. I don't want to give too much away about the story, but he was famously. There was an assassination attempt dealt against him on a plane. He was poisoned, and he very nearly lost his life. And then that spurred on a sort of quest to, it sort of, galvanized and invigorated his sort of quest for justice to find out who did this to him, and also just, to hold his family really tight and just invigorated them to try and again fight the corruption in the Kremlin and get that message out to the Russian people. Really inspirational guy. And right from the outset, Navalny positions itself as having the filmmaking motion that mirrors the urgency of the subject matter. It's ruthlessly compelling and begins like firing on all cylinders. It's like rapid fire from the word go. grabs you by the lapels and drags you through this story. Alexei Navalny powerfully states at the start that he won't say his dying message to his audience because that's something he's asked on camera. If you were to die in a week, what would you say to your audience? He's like, no, let's not do that. We can make a boring film about memory after making this one. Now's the time to get the point across. And he's a commanding and authoritative subject, terrifically entertaining and insightful in his interviews, and also very kind of funny and right, and is able to poke fun at the situation whilst also, instilling a great amount of, urgency in the viewer and his audience. His fearless and valiant pursuit of justice and a better future for Russia is so impactfully communicated in these interviews that you feel completely seized and pulled along by him. The pacing and editing, both on a technical and a structural level, are beyond excellent. The edit does so much to heighten the quality of this film, and it's able to keep this galvanizing thriller-like pace and acute pressure cooker tension at a heightened level throughout literally the entire runtime. And admittedly, it's not a very long film. I think it dips just shy of 90 minutes, but the fact that it literally keeps that same level of rollicking pace throughout the entire film is a really impressive feat, and even more so when you consider several other points. There are many currently running plot threads that the edit juggles with total mastery and ease. It effortlessly and balletically jumps between the political intrigue, Navalny's poisoning, the public indictments of the Kremlin, his family interaction, and his daughter and wife's and son's feelings on everything that's going on, the organization that investigated the Kremlin's involvement with his assassination attempt, Navalny's past, and his mission statement. It instills the same sense of intrigue and thrill of a large-scale espionage flick, and it feels like totally even-handed with all of these subjects. There's great editorial poise as well, displayed in how shots lengthen during some more intimate and more tranquil familial interactions, then will punch through a blistering, energetic montage displaying the gathering of data or the flurry of news reports and the scrambles during the rush to save Navalny after the poisoning. That ebb and flow of pace, it's never jarring, it's carried off without any stumbles at all. It knows when exactly to weave in a sequence of the family relationships to keep sight of the emotional core of the story that gives the political struggles way after a flurry of news report montage, but it never dips so much into the family life that it loses sight of the social point it's trying to make. Or it circles back to the main interview with Navalny that forms sort of the backbone of the film, after considerable screen time spent on computer screen graphics of data being collected and investigated, has that technical edge, but also that human touch. It also renders the complexity and intricate nature of the political situation in Russia totally coherently. I was totally unfamiliar with the subject prior to viewing, and I supremely admired the comprehensive clarity with which the film laid out the subject matter. It's so taut and has such propulsive forward momentum, but it never sacrifices transparency in the material. The score does a great job of mirroring that tone. These tight, jolting, militaristic strings and bustling, intrigue-laden synthesizers. They do a lot to contribute to the kinetic, pulsing feeling of the danger that's driving the narrative forward. The expert camera work also gives the documentary this razor-sharp cinematic edge. It has a lot of filmmaking heft behind it. There's this, the stark and static framing of the main interview gives Navalny's rhetoric and objectives the weight they need, whereas the more tactile handheld work of the family scenes helps retain that human touch. And the news and data montages are equally slick and tightly assembled. I loved this. This was brilliant. I was really amazed at just how I haven't been this gripped by a documentary in quite a while. And it, like all the best documentaries do on any subject, it galvanized me and pulled me into a subject which I had no prior involvement with, and made me utterly engrossed in that. And yeah, just massive props to the film for being able to do that. It's also worth noting that there's an incredible sequence at the halfway mark that slows the edit down to a crawl to squeeze the tension out of what is the most shocking and darkly hilarious and exhilarating prank call scene I think I've ever watched in a documentary or fictional film. It's the film's centerpiece, and it's an absolute barnstormer. It's a fabulous scene. It just makes me smile just thinking about it, but I won't spoil it here, although it was well documented on the news at the time. This was fantastic. I would give this a really solid high A. Bordering on maybe that highest grading, but I'm feeling a solid A on this one. It's great. Would recommend, and does richly deserved its Oscar win.
And where can people watch it?
So it's currently on BBC iPlayer at the moment.
Fantastic. Well, I know what I'm watching after we finish today, with high praise like that. Talking of Oscars, we've got another Oscar nomination coming up next, and this had quite a bit of controversy around it. We did actually cover controversy around the Oscar nomination on a previous episode, because it wasn't out in the UK when all of this went down. And we said, well, when it comes out, you need to see it to see if this Oscar nomination is warranted. So just for a little bit of context, just tell people what went down with the Oscar nomination, and then let us know what you thought of To Leslie.
So Andrea Riseborough starred in To Leslie, which was a very small independent drama that I think had a budget of around $1 million and made very little money. Basically, almost nobody saw it or was aware of it. I certainly wasn't aware of it. And at sort of the last minute, a couple of weeks, I think, before the Oscar nominations were announced, when kind of the shortlists were going on, there was a surge of social media attention and campaigning by several big actresses in Hollywood to try and secure Andrea Riseborough an Oscar nomination for To Leslie. She's a really talented actress, and I think really underrated, and deserves more attention I think she's got in the past. And I think there was maybe a combination of that plus people really admiring the quality of her performance, and they really just pushed for votes at the last minute, and it ended up securing her a surprise Best Actress nomination, which nobody expected, but I think after having seen the film, was richly deserved. I mean, it was investigated as to whether or not the campaign had been conducted in a fair and legitimate manner. And it was concluded that in the end it was. And, absolutely, if actors want to campaign for a performance that they feel like hasn't been seen enough and deserves the attention, then it's, they're the ones voting in the end, and they have every right to do that if they feel like the awards consideration is warranted, and if the performance is of merit. And after having seen the film, I would agree. Given the independent nature of the drama and the very direct focus it has drawn on Andrea Riseborough and her central performance, the film will, in the end, it will live and die on the quality of that performance. And this is especially true considering the only reason the film has reached this level of notoriety is because of that controversy, really. And, so it poses the question, does she make it worth seeing? And the answer is a resounding yes. It focuses on a woman named Leslie who wins kind of a small stakes in the lottery in Texas, and I think she wins around $150,000, sort of between $150 and $200,000. And we see her win at the start, and then we flash forward to 6 years later, where she's essentially squandered all of her money, and she's suffering tremendously with substance abuse issues and alcoholism, drug use, and just generally, off the rails, very volatile personality who sort of leaves sort of destruction in her wake with regards to her family. And we sort of follow her life as she attempts to reconstruct those connections and get back to who she is as a person and get her life back on track. I've been a big fan of Andrea Riseborough's, dating all the way back to Maid and Dagenham in 2010 and Oblivion in 2013. But I think this is easily her best work to date. She has this obstreperous, volatile, searing anger that she fires off with such venom during the early stages of the film, coupled with this dishevelled whimsy and, inertia that she hazily moves through when intoxicated or trying to manipulate care or attention out of somebody. Then there's this lethargy and weariness as when the explosive hatred, dissipates, and she's left with crushing defeat and loneliness after sort of the alcohol or the sort of the high of the anger wears off. And yet despite this tremendously erratic and capricious behavior that is quite difficult to sort of adjust to and sort of like at first, Andrea Riseborough, she still manages to lay on the pathos and that genuine want to do better in the character, that broken soul riddled with illness and trauma that's stifling her more vibrant characteristics, because we do get glimmers of a pleasant, congenial person in there, which is just a credit to her performance and how nuanced and layered it is. It's in the second half that we really start to see this more delicate and empathetic side of her and how those qualities shine through. I think had it not been for Michelle Yeoh and Cate Blanchett being such powerhouses this year, I think Riseborough would have been a surefire contender for taking home the award. That, and had she been in a more sort of critically and audience noted film. But I think this really is an Oscar caliber performance. Although this is a very performance-centric work, the filmmaking does do a terrific job of supporting and enhancing that performance. The widescreen aspect ratio it gives it that cinematic heft, but there's a brittle, unvarnished visual sensibility here that it makes the drama and intensity feel that much more raw. And the director shows a great touch also for these very kind of gritty, punchy handheld sequences, but also long takes and drawn-out push-ins to lay bare the desperation of Leslie's alcoholism and how isolated she is. And it's here that we see most vividly the film's non-judgmental lens that understands completely the torment of her illness. And the film's pace is also very varied with great execution. The sometimes punishingly raw first half has this terrific free-flowing and snowballing motion that brilliantly complements the unpredictable nature of Leslie's predicaments and her behaviour. Neither she nor the audience really knows where she'll end up in that first half, and that makes it, terrifically compelling and intriguing to see where she will go and where her interactions will take her next. What the film then does beautifully is withdraw and dial down a lot of that furious interaction of early days and settle in for quiet and more delicate character drama that facilitates, that audience respite from, the explosiveness of her behaviour early on. And it also gives more script and performance breathing room to then so lovingly and gradually set Leslie on a more hopeful path, whilst not also totally absolving her of her past wrongs. It's very even-handed with her character, which I really appreciated. It doesn't just say, you were bad early on, knife edge, okay, we've totally changed now, she's kind of making mistakes even as she's trying to improve, which feels very authentic. If I have some minor complaints, it's simply that the film isn't really reinventing the wheel when it comes to an alcoholism or addiction-based drama. There's plot elements and characters, the broken relationship with the son, the sister or friend who, feels betrayed and, doesn't want to absolve her friend of her wrongdoing, but also misses her friend. Some stuff we will have seen before. And towards the final 10 minutes, I did start to feel as though the film was overstaying its welcome a little bit. But pretty soon after that, sensation started to set in. To Leslie ends on a passionate, moving, and very earned conclusion. So I can't knock it too much on that issue of length. In general, the film's tremendous authenticity also moves the narrative away from feeling too run-of-the-mill. I like this very much, and it's, the storytelling is on point, but I think, for that reason, as well as Andrea Riseborough alone, I think this is well worth seeing. I would give this an A-. It's very good.
Well, mystery solved then. No, we know why it was nominated now, and it sounds like it had a right to be there. So yeah. Great to hear that it's a good film. Okay, moving on, and I believe this is another documentary, and it's not House of the Mouse, it's A House Made of Splinters, which sounds painful, so please explain.
It does sound painful, and it's a great title actually. It's very indicative of the subject matter and the themes. So this was also nominated for the Best Documentary Oscar this year. It can also be watched on BBC iPlayer alongside Navalny, and it does have a subject link here. It focuses on a Ukrainian orphanage around sort of 2014, 2015, when those initial conflicts in Ukraine, were starting to show themselves, and it zooms its lens in on 4 children at an orphanage in eastern Ukraine. It's a special orphanage. It focuses on both children who have been displaced by the conflict and also children who are awaiting, court custody decisions and have been displaced because of that, due to maybe neglect or abusive parental relationships. And it spans the period of 4 years, following 4 children's lives in this orphanage, and the various court battles and proceedings, and how the heads of the orphanage try to help them grow and make their lives better and see them through this very difficult time. And what's apparent right from the start of A House Made of Splinters is the incredible intimacy of the filmmaking approach. The director must have spent a tremendous amount of time just being and existing and interacting with the subjects, because the camera is so close at times to the children that it almost doesn't feel like a documentary. The tighter angles are of such close proximity to their faces at times when they're maybe talking on the phone to their parent who they haven't seen in ages, or maybe can be quite distressed, that it almost feels like a drama in its framing. It echoes shots that when we would really want to push in close upon the subtle emotions of an actor's face. And I don't say this as a criticism at all. I just think it's remarkable that as to how deeply linked the camera is to, at times, quite distressed and displaced subjects, and yet how it doesn't feel intrusive. It almost always treats the children with the most profound sense of empathy, and because there is so much unspoken trust and connection between director and subject, the documentary is that much more deeply felt and impassioned, which in turn makes the stories of these children's lives far more moving and engaging, and we feel intrinsically linked to their struggles and are desperate for them to see some kind of positive change. I say almost always with regards to the director's empathetic lensing, due to the fact that there are a couple of occasions, comparatively few but present nonetheless, compared to the moments that get it right, where the distance that the camera is viewing an interaction from and the angle at which it's shooting that moment from and framing it veers a little close to being prying and a bit voyeuristic. One moment in particular, when one of the children who's been suffering with his mental health and has been harming himself as well, he's visited by his mother, and he cries in his mother's arms, and she reassures him, and she tells him not to cry and comforts him. And whilst that's a very moving situation, I have all the sympathy in the world for those two. It feels as though, from a filmmaking perspective, like it was trying to present the upset of this child more as a tactic for serving the overall anti-war and neglect message, rather than being linked to the emotional substance and inquisitive want to understand these children that's present in the rest of the character portraits. But these moments are few and far between, though, and the director also shows a really good judgment in knowing when to pull back and view the interconnected, joyous rapport between the children in the orphanage, whether they're playing together or teaching each other a dance routine. There's also quite disquieting, but not forced or artificial intertwining of happiness and despair and darkness. There's a really memorable moment, a really impactful moment, where these kids are telling kind of horror stories from their past experiences with war, but they're all almost telling them as strangely thrilling ghost stories, and like they're kind of exciting underneath this multicoloured sort of spinning nightlight. It's a really fascinating sequence because it's kind of like distilling these children's desire to kind of try and find the good in their surroundings and try and make light of what is a very somber and dark existence at times. And it wonderfully captures that incongruence and unfairness in these bright-eyed children being exposed to such atrocities. And in those earlier sequences with the children interacting with like dance routines and playing games and things like that, there's a really great sense of community within the home. I think it's particularly powerful when a documentary allows the social message of the film to be spoken more through us connecting those dots by naturally viewing the lives and the behaviour of real people and the effects of those events on the subjects, rather than being lectured by, you know, this really tepid voiceover. I think generally this is something A House Made of Splinters does terrifically well. There were, however, a couple of instances where this quite pointed and exacting and forced voiceover is used to relay some statistical information or fill us in on a child's background. I would have rather found that information delivered through more organic, in-the-moment interviews with carers at the orphanage, of which we see many, rather than, you know, slight filmmaking artifice swooping in at that moment to, you know, provide an expositional dump. Whereas I think, you know, we could have got that from one of the subjects on camera. There were also some sections where the film felt structurally a tad obtuse in how the edit introduced certain children before quickly moving on to and staying with another for a quite significant portion of the runtime before heading back to those initial children. At times, the narrative deviations don't flow the most coherently, and the focus perhaps not the most evenly distributed. But again, going back to that original point, the depth of emotion in the presentation of these children's lives and how close and intimately the filmmakers connected with these subjects is really quite something to behold, and it makes the message feel very urgent and really hit hard. And I was very moved overall by the work, and I do think it deserved the Oscar nomination as well. Although I would probably say in the category overall, I think it's my least favourite, but I think it's well worth watching this as well. Again, it's on BBC iPlayer, House Made of Splinters. I would give this an A-. I think this is a very good documentary as well.
BBC iPlayer are getting some really good documentaries in at the moment. That's really nice to see. It's nice to see them championing other filmmakers, and especially filmmakers from outside of the UK's work. It's really nice to see. Long may it continue. Let's get some other international documentaries on there. On to our final film. And this is Where is Anne Frank? Which I feel like I've heard of it, but I've got no idea what it's about. So please fill me in.
So I remember this playing at the Watershed late last year, and it's now on Sky Cinema on demand, so it can be viewed there. And it's an animated, fantastical adventure film, and also historical adventure film as well, I should say. And it focuses on when Anne Frank wrote her diaries. I actually had to do a little bit of prior research before watching to fully get the context for Where is Anne Frank. Anne addressed several entries and letters in her famous diary to an imaginary friend she had called Kitty, which I wasn't aware of beforehand. And Where is Anne Frank essentially focuses on, in a fantastical turn of events, Kitty comes alive, like right from the pages of the diary in the Anne Frank Museum in Amsterdam. Sort of the ink sort of, you know, globally like sort of rises off the page and sort of forms this animated human distillation of Kitty, of this imaginary friend. And she wonders where Anne is. You know, why is my friend no longer here? She is completely unaware of, you know, some of her death and of her fate and of her family's fate. And she goes on an adventure through Amsterdam to try and find her best friend. And it's sort of played alongside sort of past examinations of Anne Frank's creation of Kitty and what Kitty meant to her, and sort of a retelling for a younger audience of why Anne Frank wrote her diary, her life, and just her really tense and fraught existence in that hiding place during the persecution of the Jewish community in World War II. During the experience of watching Where is Anne Frank, I kept thinking to myself actually that how much the use of fantasy and surrealism reminded me of the use of dreams and fantastical sequences in the very acclaimed 2008 animated war documentary Waltz with Bashir, which is one of my favourite documentaries, and I would highly recommend to anyone who may be interested in the subject matter. It's brilliant. But it was then very gratifying and made perfect sense when Where is Anne Frank finished, and the first credit that came up said written and directed by Ari Folman, who made Waltz with Bashir. So I was like, that'll be why it was bringing that for me earlier on. And whilst Folman's style and work is what it's able to really successfully accomplish is cluing both across Waltz and Where is Anne Frank, in cluing different audiences into the effects and atrocities of war in a way that is digestible and comprehensible for an audience who cannot at all relate to horrors that soldiers and civilians in war have witnessed, experiences that are entirely removed from our own. In the case of Waltz, he used dream sequences to guide us through that documentary's examination of soldiers wrestling with repressed memories and wading through their PTSD to unlock the truth of their wartime actions, which their brains had, as a defense mechanism, instinctively blocked out. It's one of my favourite documentaries, again, most certainly for adult audiences only, though. It's quite harrowing. In the case of Anne Frank, what he's able to do with the animation and surrealist sequences here is portray the Holocaust and the persecution of the Jewish community in a way that's both palatable and sensitive in visual detail for the younger audience it's clearly pitched at, whilst providing a tasteful sense of historical adventure with Kitty's journey that will surely invest adolescent viewers. In that way, it's packaging an essential historical educational piece in a narratively compelling package for younger viewers. As with Waltz, the abstract dream sequences in Anne Frank are magnificently strange and wondrously inviting. The sense of style here is terrific. I really admire how he fuses surrealism and animation in sort of real-world scenarios. The Nazis are portrayed as these demonic, domineering, faceless ghouls, people-filled trains, careening through tracks in the sky, fantasy and reality gorgeously bleeding into one another, Ice Kitty and potential love interest ice skating and then sort of barreling sort of fluidly into a surreal dream sequence that relates some of the past events in Anne Frank's life. That being said, I was growing slightly worried over the course of watching the film, as I was quite invested in the expressionistic presentation of Anne Frank's childhood and her time in hiding, but that same attention to detail wasn't really afforded in the character development of Kitty and defining her as a distinct personality to make that branch of the narrative as compelling. I was concerned that the film was going to miss an opportunity to utilise the fantasy angle and her presence in the story as a way of delivering the theme of, an emphatic retelling of Anne Frank's writing, breaking through to a discriminatory community where her words are falling on deaf ears, where they should really be heeded now more than ever due to the negative treatment of refugees that the film, that forms the backdrop that the film is set against. And I wanted, thematically, the writing of Anne Frank and what that could do for that situation to be capitalised on. And I was worried, drawing towards the end of the film, that perhaps it wasn't necessarily going to do that. And it was really great to see that towards the very end, the screenplay did finally double down on that theme. And despite the meandering and sometimes superficial path it took to get there, the message did in fact ring true at the end, despite a slightly unsatisfying final interaction between two key characters in the end scene. That didn't necessarily deserve, the final message though. I do also feel with the various shifts in and out of realities, in and out of the historical and the fantastical, the narrative can sometimes become cluttered, which is slightly exacerbated by the disparity in character detail between Anne and Kitty, and the phrasing of the message perhaps not being as edifying to a grown audience member, a more an adult audience member with more life experience, for example. Nevertheless, the hand-drawn texture of the animation is quite gorgeous, and a timely historical message is being rendered in an accessible and visually adventurous way to a new generation, which I think should definitely be celebrated. It does have its flaws, but I think Anne Frank is really good overall and quite touching. I would give this a B.
Fantastic. Well, that's all of our reviews this week. So thank you very much, Billy. It's been kind of a history-heavy episode today, alongside a few other dramas. So yeah, really interesting to kind of delve into something that's a little bit different to our usual slate. So thank you for that. And what's coming up for us next week?
So, two films that I'm very excited to talk about next week are Infinity Pool, which is the new film from Brandon Cronenberg. I'm not really sure exactly from the trailer what the film exactly is going to be about, but I'm sure we know from the Cronenberg pedigree that it's going to be very strange and abstract and quite twisted, but also potentially very deep in character, have a lot of character depth.
Was he the one that made the film about people having sex with cars?
No, although I can see why you might think that. No, that's
someone else.
Julia Ducournau. Although I think, with the body horror, I do think that's Titan is indebted to Cronenberg in that sense. But
no, I'm thinking of Crash.
Oh yes, Crash. Sorry, I was.
Wait, they don't have sex with the cars. They have sex because of the car. I don't know. The fact that there's a way to get that confused should be worrying.
Yes, it is a little bit worrying, isn't it? Yes, yeah, no, yes. They I think in Crash they're aroused by car crashes. That's it. And yes, that's one of David Cronenberg's most famous films. So I'd never made that link before. That is really interesting. But yes, Brandon carrying the torch for his father, and also Rye Lane. I'm really interested to talk about, which is this really bubbly, blissful kind of indie romantic London-based romantic comedy, kind of in the vein of Richard Curtis, but with more sort of a little bit more real world grit. I'm very excited to talk about those two.
I'm looking forward to that one. We're going to get a bit of joy in our lives next week. A little bit of
absolutely,
a little bit of a smile, a little bit of something lighter. So looking forward to that. So as always, please tune in next week. Follow us on Instagram to get all the updates and clips and special little bits and bobs. And we will be back next week. Thank you for listening. Bye.
Bye.